to the channel. This is the second part of my MCU countdown leading up to Endgame, which comes out later this month. So I'm just going to do the next 5 films in my list. Again, there's going to be spoilers for this as well, so if you haven't seen the films, either go check them out before this or just ride along because it's been out for a long time now anyway. Anyway, so moving on swiftly into my number 16, which is... So number 16 is Avengers Age of Ultron, the second Avengers movie that came out after the end of sort of phase 1. We had the Avengers and we had phase 2 leading up to this film. And this was clearly not as good as the first one. I think this film suffers a lot from, they were trying to do too much. There is a lot of, in this film, a lot of not only what's going on with Ultron and that event, trying to set up what's going to go for us, trying to introduce more Infinity Stones with the Mind Stone when we get the Vision. We get Thor's little event thing in a pool where it kind of leads up to what's going to happen in Ragnarok. Obviously we get the introduction of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So much stuff just being thrown at you, it just seems a lot going on, and I think the film really suffers from that. I think it could have easily, the threat of Ultron himself, take away the Infinity Stone thing, was enough of a villain. I think James Spader, as well as he was good as Ultron, I think he was again very much wasted and one of those Marvel villains that really suffers from a lack of real development and motivation. It should have been a lot better, rather than could have been. It should have been a lot better there. But still, there were some good points. The team dynamic is always good. The sort of back and forth between them, the little scene where they're all trying to lift Thor's hammer is really good. I really enjoyed that. The banter again. There was a little tease of Civil War as well, with Tony and Captain America not getting on. The weird Hawkeye thing when you kind of meet his family just seemed a bit out of place, and really at that point really kind of stopped the film dead. It really stopped the flow and momentum of it. So it wasn't great. I did enjoy the Hulkbuster scene though, when the Hulk kind of loses his mind when Scarlet Witch manipulates his memory, and then Tony Stark goes over to him with the Hulkbuster suit. That scene was great. It was really good to see those two fight. We'll obviously get a lot more of the heroes fighting later on in the universe, but this was kind of the really first big one, which was really good. I enjoyed that as well. Yeah, but again with the film, the fighting all the Ultron bots at the end was just a replica of what happened in New York when they fought T'Challa Army. So it wasn't the best. It's not a terrible film. It served its purpose. It kind of moved the universe along, but I was expecting a lot more, especially out of a villain of Ultron. Anyway, so moving on to my next film, number 15, which is going to be... So number 15 is Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man film that came out directly after actually Age of Ultron. And I think Ant-Man has again been dealt quite a hard hand because he's the first film to follow a massive Avengers movie. They're always really hard to follow up. Iron Man 3 wasn't too bad because it was still one of the main characters. This is completely stripped down, back to basics, very tiny, pun intended, film straight off the back of the Avengers 2. And again, I prefer this to the second one, obviously because it's a little bit lower down on my list, but it still wasn't quite where I wanted it. Again, the villain really lets it down. The villain of Yellow Jacket, again, it's just a replica of what the hero is without the subtleties of, like, the Joker. The Joker is a reflection of Batman. They're the two sides of the same coin, whereas Yellow Jacket is just an angry Ant-Man. It's just not the same. But for the plus points of the film, again, the cast is really good. Paul Rudd is amazing as Ant-Man. Evangeline Lilly get introduced as a Wasp. Although we don't see her as the Wasp in this film, it does set up what happens later on in Ant-Man and the Wasp. But she was really good. I thought Michael Douglas was great. All the cast did a really good job. The film is actually genuinely really funny, especially the Michael Pena bit. This is Luis when he's just rattling off. They're really great to watch. They're good even just to watch the snippet on their own just on YouTube. And I liked the introduction of the shrinking technology and the way they kind of play around it, especially the sort of end climax fight when they're fighting in Paul Rudd's Ant-Man's daughter's bedroom. And they've got the Thompson tank engine, and it zooms out and it kind of just falling over. From their point of view, it's this big explosion, it's a big huge set piece. So that was really good. I've really enjoyed how they kind of worked in the shrinking technology. But again, it kind of lacks from a little bit of standoutness. It doesn't really kind of register. A lot of people kind of just go by, and a lot of people even skip this film because it didn't star one of the main kind of Avengers of the film. So it suffers from that a little bit, but it's still an enjoyable film. I definitely think you should go ahead and give it a go. Anyway, so moving on once again to number 14. So number 14 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the sequel to Guardians of the Galaxy. This one, again, I think there's some very, very good points to it. The film is very, very funny. There's a lot of great comedy moments. The star, and definitely still to show, is Baby Groot. There's nothing that Baby Groot doesn't do that didn't make me chuckle or at least smile, and I felt they used him very, very well. I thought it was kind of just thrown in as just a way to sell toys, but the way they use him in the film was great. The bit when he says that they kind of make out. I see, what I don't really get is when Groot says "I am Groot" and Rocket responds, is Rocket just making up his own conversation, or does he actually understand Groot? Later on, they do kind of confirm they do understand him a little bit, but the whole thing with like why he doesn't like people with hats is hilarious. You just go watch it; it's great fun. And again, the team of the Guardians, for a lot of the film, they're actually split apart. The large chunk of the film, they're kind of split into two halves, whereas Star-Lord, Gamora, and Drax go off to the Ego's planet, and Rocket, Groot, and Nebula, who kind of joins in, goes off with Yondu, and they have their own adventure. So usually towards the end, they come together. But I think this film kind of suffers from, I think it's trying to be too funny. There was a lot of moments when the humour I felt was a bit misplaced. The main kind of point of that is towards the end climax when Ego and Star-Lord are battling it out. One forms a giant sort of rock version of himself. Star-Lord forms a giant version of Pac-Man, which just seemed a bit, he's meant to be quite a big drama, and they threw a joke in there. And the fact that obviously Peter Quill was always kind of seen David Hasselhoff as his dad, and there's a point when Ego is kind of giving him this big, I want you to be my son, and he turns to David Hasselhoff, which just, again, it was a little giggle, but it's kind of misplaced a little bit. I think the film was trying to be too funny with what he was doing. And I think Drax's role gets reduced really heavily. In the first one, he had a kind of he was funny because he didn't get the subtle humour and didn't get nuances, and that's funny, but he still had a purpose. Obviously, he had his revenge of his family that he wanted to achieve, and although that got him into a bad situation, this film he's just an idiot. Like he just says dumb stuff, and it's just not where I really wanted that character to go. On the plus side, they did build the character of Nebula, who I think was like kind of underused in the first film. This film, she really gets built up, and as well as leading into Avengers, I think that's really important to have that character be quite a high up, because obviously her direct link to Thanos. And Ego was actually really good. One of the few Marvel villains that is something a little bit memorable. Kurt Russell playing Ego, the Living Planet. I felt he was really good. I really kind of enjoyed his manipulation of Star-Lord, and he kind of was nice and everything. You kind of see slowly break away and becomes the main villain of the movie. But it was really good. And obviously Yondu had his big moment as well, which was really good to see. And I really liked the Yondu character. It's a shame that he died. Spoilers, I've told you already. But hopefully we may see him come back. I don't think we will, though. He pretty definitive death, but I liked that although Peter's father was evil, his actual kind of dad was Yondu, and he was always there for him, which I think was quite nice to see. Anyway, moving on once again to my next movie, which is... So the next film is Captain Marvel. This is the newest of the MCU movies, only came out a few weeks ago. And as I said in my review for the film, I did really enjoy it for the most part. It does have its problems, but Brie Larson was great. I loved to see her powers, where she comes from, what her power set is. Although she does seem a little bit too powered, I think she'll get quite humbled when it comes to Endgame. But she was really good. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed her back and forward with Nick Fury. I thought their chemistry was really good. That sort of buddy cop comedy thing going on. Really enjoyed that. It was good to see Coulson back as well. We've not seen him in an Avengers movie since the Avengers. Obviously, we've had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it was good to see him back, see a little bit more dynamic from him. I did actually enjoy the Skrulls, although sort of the advertising portrayed them to be the villains of the film. They weren't. They had a really good story, and they were justifying what they were doing. Although they didn't really do anything bad in the film, I enjoyed it. Ben Mendelsohn as the head Skrull was really, really good, and it was quite funny when he talking about changing. It's all about a bit skill, a little bit arrogant, but it was really funny. I think what lets the film down, and this is going to be spoilers, is sort of twist of who the villain becomes. And it's Yomrog, who's Jude Law's character, and it turns out they're the ones after this power, which turns out to be the Tesseract from the obviously the first Avengers and Captain America. So having that revealed to be the power that everyone's after was a bit like, because we've seen the Tesseract. Of all the Infinity Stones, it's probably the one we're most familiar with because it's featured in multiple films, not just this. So it was a bit like, it was good to see it at the time, but it was just a bit, nah. The cat stole the show in this one. they kept building up saying, oh, it's not really a cat, it's not really a cat. And then suddenly you see what the cat does, these big tentacle things come out of his mouth and destroys all the villains, which was really funny the first time they did it. And he did it a couple of times, but when he did do it, it was still funny. But again, one of my main problems with this was it did all seem a bit sort of grey and grum. The colour palette in this, I don't know, for a Marvel film was very, very bland until Captain Marvel gets her blue and red suit, which really kind of then pops off the screen, which maybe was the idea, but the whole film just seemed a bit drab from a colour palette point of view. And as I said, there was some dumb stuff in this when it comes to retroactive. Obviously, the story of how the Tesseract ends up on that ship is a bit convoluted. It's kind of hard to try and work backwards, but I'm sure there is some sort of fan fiction, or there is something released that I don't see that explains how the Tesseract got there, as well as how Nick Fury loses his eye. In The Winter Soldier, he says, the last time I trusted someone, I ended up losing an eye. Turns out the cat scratched it out, which just is idiotic. I mean, he's really stupid, but that is now canon. There's nothing we're going to do to change that, but there we go. Also, there is another point when in the Avengers, Nick Fury says, why are you building this big army? And he says because of him, and he points at Thor. He shows, oh, there was intergalactic bad guys. But he's fought with Captain Marvel before he sees Thor, so it just seems a bit retroactive. This is the problem when you do prequels well into already established universes. But overall, it is a good film. I think it's something you do need to see to kind of show you who Captain Marvel is going to be going into Endgame, because I think she just shows up in that. It might be a bit confusing. But overall, it's a good film with its problems. Anyway, so moving on to the last one of this list, which is going to be... So the last one on this is Captain America, the First Avenger. The origin tale of the Captain America character, this leads right into the events of what happens in Avengers Assemble, if you're from the UK. Again, this one, really enjoyed it. It has that really sort of old school superhero feel. It's got the big sort of theatrical score and everything. And again, casting wise, nail on the head. Chris Evans is perfect Captain America. I really like the digital effects of making him really short and scrawny and then building him up to this huge, giant, muscly character. And they actually kind of say it in the film where if you give this power to someone who's already strong, they won't appreciate it. If you give it to someone who's weak, they know how to use it. They're going to appreciate every moment that they had this power. And it's really good. Although his power's a little bit undefined, like sometimes he's really strong, sometimes he's not as strong. It's a bit undefined, but you kind of get it. He's really strong. He's really agile. He doesn't really age. He can survive ice, apparently. He was really good. I really like Hayley Atwell as Peggy Carter as well. She was a good kind of Thor. Doesn't take no nonsense. Just really just lays it out. Tells it as it is. Just tells Steve, no, you're doing this. You're doing this. She's no sort of down under stress. She could clearly probably save Captain America if she really wanted to. She was great. I liked his little team as well. The problem I've had with this one is they didn't really build up Bucky as much. Obviously, Bucky comes back, becomes the Winter Soldier later on down the line. But in this film, he kind of just there, he's teased for and then he's gone. There was no tease, there was no sort of giving you reason to care about him until he comes back. So when you watch the film back again, it's just a bit... I felt they could have done more with Bucky to kind of make you think, oh, I really wish they'd bring Bucky back. And then they do. But this, he's kind of there, he dies about halfway through the film. And it doesn't really... I don't know, it doesn't really impact you as much as it should do because obviously what his attachment is to Steve in the future. As well as the Red Skull. I thought Hugo Weaving did a good job as the Red Skull. Such an iconic villain, but again, wasn't how I thought the Red Skull would be. He wasn't as menacing as I thought he would be. It just seemed a bit of a nut job. And I know he is. He's just some crazy Nazi, but didn't really kind of leave a lasting impact. And I thought he was gone. I thought that's it. We're not going to get him back. And obviously, spoiler alert, again, he kind of pops up in Avengers: Infinity War, which was good to see him come back because hopefully then we'll get more of him, more of his interaction with Captain America. But it was all just a bit nah when it comes to them. But the film itself is a really good adventure film. It's good to have a different time period set during the war as well. So it's a Marvel war movie, which was good. But very much an enjoyable film. Definitely something I think you should check out as well. Anyway, that is my list for this week. I will be back in a couple of days to do the next batch. Obviously, as we get closer to Endgame as well, I'll obviously definitely have another one before that film comes out. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye.